and a lot for us to talk about. Remember your Q&A tab and chat with your questions and observations. And Dr. Kwankam.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the globe. It's indeed an honor and a privilege for me to share some of my thoughts on telehealth with you. The organizers, that's the IFMBCE, wanted me to talk about global perspectives and on CE and telehealth, given my background as former chief of digital health at WHO. I've always believed that success or failure of a technology or innovation depends heavily on historical context. Too late, and it's no use. Too soon, and there are issues of adoption. So the timing has to be just right. Hence the title of my talk, which involves or which includes a subtitle, Surfing the Waves of Historical Context. My three main affiliations are shown. I'm sorry. Could you back up, please? Yes. My three main affiliations should appear there, but they don't. Oh yeah, they do appear. Next slide, please. Yep. Right. So what is telehealth? Well, most of us know what it means, but the tele comes from the Greek, meaning at a distance. So telehealth is health at a distance. The term telemedicine itself was not coined until 1967 by Ken Bird at Harvard University. Although the term was not coined until centuries later, it could just as well have been invented by the Greeks, because the practice of telemedicine is as old as healthcare. In ancient times, telemedicine consisted of a person going to a healer on behalf of another person too sick to go themselves, describing their symptoms and coming back with recommendations from the healer. The process is pretty much the same today in that it involves three distinct pieces. That is, somebody in need of help, somebody else who is capable of helping that person, and some method of communication between the two persons. So, as I said, much has not changed since in this model since ancient times. What has mostly changed is the method of communication, from a runner to smoke signals to semaphore signals to modern telecommunications via voice, text, or video. One could actually argue that when the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, exclaimed, "Mr. Watson, I need you," supposedly, and Mr. Watson, who was in another room, heard him through the experimental device they were working on, this could be considered the first instance of modern telemedicine. Improvements in messaging and other communications technologies have not fundamentally changed the model. They've simply modified the modality. Next slide, please. So let's start at the top, at the left side of this graphic. In April 1924, the editor of the Radio News published this cartoon of Radio Doctor, ? Which foreshadowed the use of radio and other communications to care for the sick. At the bottom right, you'll see a photo from a telemedicine session in Canada in 2004, 80 years later. Note the similarities: a patient presenting symptoms through a contraption to a remote doctor, which with each of them talking to the other, through a screen. To go from the top left vision to that reality on the bottom right required a number of significant improvements in technology. In the top middle, we have John von Neumann's architecture for a general purpose digital computing machine proposed in 1945. In the lower middle, we have a stylized transistor invented by William Shockley, Walter Brattain, and John Bardeen in the dying days of 1949. And on the top right, you have an integrated circuit first demonstrated by Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments in 1958. So it took all these technologies to make that dream come true. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about two landmark events in telemedicine or telehealth in general. The first one has to do with a video called WHA71, the discovery of television among the bees. This was shown in May 1993, and I quote from then Vice President Al Gore's account of it. A cult movie entitled WHA71 or the discovery of television among the bees was broadcast over the internet to a small worldwide audience who watched and listened to it live on their computers. The video was fuzzy and in black and white, and the audio sputtered in and out, but this digital moonwalk marked another small yet significant step towards the much heralded convergence of audio, video, and data. This event, end of quote, this event demonstrated the use of computers as an all-purpose communications device, combining the functions of a telephone, television, email, text, video clips, still images, and audio. And the next event, seminal event, was in April 1995, when an SOS email was sent around the globe on the internet requesting international help for a young Chinese female student suffering from an unknown but severe disease. This led to the first recorded internet diagnosis of Zhu Lingling with thallium poisoning. Today, we can routinely send images, studies throughout the internet and carry out live demonstrations and remote consultations. Next slide, please. Recognizing the power of information and communication technology to support health, international bodies have sought to encourage countries to leverage information and communication technology to strengthen their health system. One such key global declaration was publicized by India's Union Minister for Health, J.P. Nadda, who tweeted, "I'm happy to share that the landmark resolution on digital health initiated by India was unanimously adopted." This was on 25th of May, 2018. This followed similar declarations, which many of you are familiar with, WHISIS, that's the World Summit of the Information Society, World Health Assembly resolutions on e-health and interoperability. And in 2019, the World Health Organization published the first ever guidelines on digital health, with 2 of the 10 recommendations focused on telemedicine, client to provider telemedicine and provider to provider telemedicine. You know, a medical practice has quote unquote arrived when a WHO guideline is issued on its use. Even so, initial uptake was slow, as witnessed by unused funds for teleconsultation reimbursement at CMS in the US, many years running at that. This despite some sparks of interest earlier, as the creation of the Office for the Advancements of Telehealth in the US. Next slide, please. So in comes COVID. It took the coronavirus pandemic to bring telehealth to a new level. The lockdown created a spike in all things tele, doing things from a distance, virtual visits, remote provider-to-provider consultation, remote monitoring that Manisha so eloquently talked about. All the significant fallouts from the pandemic have been an increase in these tele activities. And in countries, there's been a call for use of telemedicine, and followed by, in some cases, a relaxation of previously very stringent regulations on the use of these technologies. This has resulted in a plethora of telemedicine and telehealth offerings with anecdotal evidence of benefits from many quarters. In India, for example, the government has requested the ISFTH National Member Association, the Telemedicine Society of India, to provide training on telemedicine to 500,000 clinicians. A prequel to this came in March 2019, when McKinsey published its report titled Digital India, Technology to Transform a Connected Nation, in which they posit and quantify potential quality improvements and cost savings from telemedicine. The ISFTH itself has has supported fighting of the pandemic in 3 key areas: action research, sharing of information, and providing expertise. Next slide, please. So the pandemic has taught us a lot. We have discovered, in some cases, rediscovered how to do things at a distance, whether in relation to work, play, or health, with information sharing and provision of expertise. And just last week, on the 24th of September, telehealth was announced as a key pillar of the US administration's new healthcare plan. Given that telehealth will improve access, this completes the 3 axes of the healthcare efficiency space, as again, very eloquently put by Manish: quality, access, and cost. All of this can be seen as a global proof of concept for telehealth and in general doing things as much as we can at a distance. And we believe COVID-19 has therefore brought us to an inflection point for takeoff in global adoption of telemedicine. And we can leverage 3 other technologies in this effort. These are medicines and technology, in the area of medicines and technologies, where point of care 3D printing can be used, has already been used to print the first pill that's approved by the FDA, can be used to produce medical devices for all sorts of purposes, where the second technology, supply chain, leveraging the use of drones. Again, Manish has talked about this. And finally, your artificial intelligence, machine learning, and components of it like that, where expert systems can help support decision-making in health. Next slide, please. So the future of health is digital, but that future already exists. As William Gibson very adequately pointed out, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And around the globe, we see examples of that future in the US, in Australia, in Switzerland, where, for example, 5,000 patients are seen in one city virtually on a daily basis by Medgate. And the interesting thing being that 50% of these encounters completely resolve the issues with no need to go further into the healthcare system. India also is another example of this. Next slide, please. So we want to be able to leverage the entire healthcare pyramid. This is, on the left, there is a photo of Francis Omaswa, who famously said, "Health is made at home and only repaired in institutions." And if you look at some of the literature, you'll find that, for example, as far back as the year 2000, there was data to show that 70 to 90% of all interventions occur in the home and the community. So our telehealth, the telehealth that we want to deliver to leverage this new interest in doing things at a distance, needs to make sure that it leverages the most important resource in the health system, that's the people, that it reaches previously unreached people, and that extends the catchment areas of health facilities to a boundless virtual community. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Yunkap, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so the way forward is to create pull forces. And again, all of this information is available in previous work that we've done. This is a model of how to create pull forces in countries. Next slide, please. This particular one talks about national societies. This element of this framework deals with a network of excellence to be able to share information within the country as well as globally. Next slide, please. Right. So some work has already been done in this area in a concept that we call the Global Knowledge Commons. And basically, the Knowledge Commons does the following. It answers the question, who is doing what, where, how well is it working, what can we learn from it, and what can we reuse from it. And that image on the right is the cover of a report that we published for the International Society for Telemedicine and eHealth, published in collaboration with the Innovation Working Group in October 2015, on just how to create this global knowledge commons. Next slide, please. Right. Manish again has talked about the issues of equity. Some very disturbing, impressive, but still disturbing data that more people have access to a mobile phone than to clean water, electricity, or toothbrushes. So the caution here is not to go overboard on digital, and remember that it takes many more aspects of daily life to produce health. And then when it comes to equity, as distinct from equality, the lesson from that image on the left is that equal treatment does not always result in equity outcomes or equitable outcome. So we must target some of our interventions on the idea of supporting the underserved in a prioritized manner. And already there's some beginnings of the digital divide where, based on a survey recently, you see that experts and health workers do not agree on what the digital priorities should be. Next slide, please. Right, so in conclusion, we think this is a time for collective action, because whatever contributions members of the ISFTH family may have made to the development of technology, all of that was recorded on the supply side, the technology supply side. We now need to work on the demand side, for technology pull forces in countries using the framework that we've proposed earlier. And this is where an institution like the IFMBE and the CED in particular, have an important role to play, so that we build these pull forces in countries, and that contribution gets recognized under the brand and the name of these societies like the IFMBE, like the ISFTH. And if you're wondering what you as an individual can do, by joining this effort, I refer you to the famous quote from Margaret Mead, the American anthropologist, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of committed, thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Next slide, please. My final slide is, and my apologies to those who've seen this before, it's a conjecture that I have, similar to Pierre de Fermat's conjecture called Fermat's last theorem, which says that for positive integers a, b, and c, that equation there is not true for any n greater than 2. This was postulated in 1637. It took 358 years to eventually prove this in 1994-95. So my postulate, my conjecture is the following. Click, please. That for every dollar invested in telehealth, it will result in 1 DALY saved, disability adjusted life year, or 1 health adjusted life expectancy year earned. But the point is that the relationship is one of positivity. The proportionality constant could be anything, but you invest, you reap benefits. I hope it doesn't take 358 years to prove this, but the value of attempting to prove this lies not so much in whether it's right or wrong, but in attempting to do so, the data we gather, the research we do will provide tremendous insights into the telehealth enterprise, and that can only be good for the development of telehealth and the use of telehealth to address health challenges. I thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Yunkap. Great job.